The Lift+Love podcast is rooted in faith, family, and the conviction that loving LGBTQ people is a calling to be embraced, not feared. Produced by the Lift+Love team, we focus on topics relevant to Latter-day Saint LGBTQ individuals and their parents, relatives, friends, and others who are navigating this space with faith. Across episodes, hosts from the Lift+Love team and their guests address current topics, offer practical support, and share experiences related to LGBTQ+ issues. Each conversation is grounded in compassion, honesty, and a commitment to keep families connected to each other and Christ. Learn more and access resources at liftandlove.org. We're here with Carey Baldwin today, and I feel like it's like the old days. Carey and Darice and I all met at our mother's conference we did in 2021, right, Darice? 2022.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about eating disorders in the LGBTQ population. But Carey, why don't you tell us about how you got into this, how you know about this, your background and your study and all of that.
Okay. Yeah, let's see, where does it start? So I majored in dietetics at BYU back in the 90s. I actually, to be a little bit vulnerable, I had an eating disorder as a teenager and into college. I majored in, I don't think I knew I had an eating disorder at the time. I just thought I was a really healthy eater, I guess. And then as I was majoring in dietetics, thinking, oh, this would be the perfect career for me because I know so much about nutrition and things. In my major, I discovered that, oh my gosh, that's me. I have an eating disorder. And so that took me on my journey to become a dietitian. And kind of got me into recovery from that. And now I work as an eating disorder dietitian at an outpatient eating disorder clinic in Denver. And I love it. It's so fulfilling to help individuals, especially because I can relate to a lot of what they're going through. And we just find that within the LGBTQ population, eating disorders are very prevalent. And so I've just really enjoyed working with that group of individuals as well. So
I want to talk more about that, but thanks for sharing that because it is vulnerable.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, at least, I mean, I remember in college being taught about anorexia, and I had no idea what it meant. But I knew that a lot of my friends had been like purging and stuff. I think there was this big influx of information in the late 80s. And then we've kind of gone quiet about disordered eating and all of the things around it. And of course, it's so complex, and it's probably with us more than it was then. So
yeah, absolutely.
I love that you're vulnerable enough to share that with us, and that it, like, this thing that was really hard for you became your kind of your career and the thing that, and it brings you joy. Like, you can see the joy when you start talking about it. So
Yeah.
let's talk about why is it so prevalent in the LGBTQ community? What happens there?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just really quick, I just want to talk a little bit about what eating disorders are just before I go into that.
Yeah.
But eating disorders are very serious and complex and like potentially life-threatening mental illness. And so they actually have the highest mortality rate, any psychiatric illness behind opioid addiction. So opioid addiction has the highest mortality rate, but then right behind that is eating disorders. And I don't think a lot of people realize how life-threatening they are. And I think some people joke about it sometimes when they someone will say something about eating disorder and they're like, oh, I wish I had an eating disorder, things like that. And I think it's just important to recognize that it's very serious, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, they include things like anorexia, bulimia, binge eating disorder. There's another one called ARFID, which is called avoidant restrictive intake disorder. And then then not only are those, but then they can be in combination. So you could have anorexia and purging and things like that. So, but in the LGBTQ population, It is especially prevalent for a variety of reasons. Some of the statistics about LGBTQ individuals are, and there's still so much research to be done. And I think we all recognize that in so many areas within this population, there's just so much more research that needs to be done. But of the research that has been done, up to 54% of LGBTQ youth and individuals either report being diagnosed with the eating disorder or suspect that they have the symptoms of an eating disorder.
That's them saying, I think I do.
Yeah, both. So, either they have been diagnosed or they think that they have the symptoms of it. So, I mean, that's over half. And then nearly 9 in 10 LGBTQ youth report being dissatisfied with their body. So, I mean, that's massive, right? Like, and so some of the, when you think about, for the statistics around gay men is especially staggering. There's only 5% of the population that are gay men, but then they account for, I think, over like around 45% of men diagnosed with eating disorders. Wow. So, yeah.
And this is making me think, like, when I talked to my trans daughter as a teen or a older teen and asking her about like how she felt about her body, I remember her saying, like, I always hated my body. And I just thought, especially as a girl growing up in the 80s and 90s, I'm like, well, that's what we all do.
Right.
I just assume that's what teenagers experience is. You just hate your body.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's interesting because in non-binary and the trans male, so those are trans individuals who are assigned female at birth that identify as male, those statistics are off almost like way higher because of the body dysmorphia and body dissatisfaction that they experience. Wow. So not only is there this element of body dissatisfaction that happens especially among our non-binary and trans friends, but then there's all these high stress factors that they're experiencing. So like feeling like they need to hide their identity, having lack of family acceptance. There's that intense social stigma that they're experiencing, discrimination, bullying, kind of internalized stigmas that they're experiencing. And so all of these psychological issues and that psychological distress, the lack of acceptance, an eating disorder is like a coping mechanism. And so it becomes a way that they are trying to control and manage that body dissatisfaction and just cope with all the psychological distress they're feeling. Yeah. So if you think, especially in youth, controlling food is kind of an easier thing to access in a way for a coping mechanism for them. You can start doing that at a young age, and it can become a sense of like, I have control over something when life feels really out of control. And so, so that is it's just a combination of the psychological distress plus the body dissatisfaction that a lot of these people feel. And together it kind of culminates into experiencing an eating disorder. So,
wow.
So, Carey, what are some of the signs to look for if you're worried about a loved one? I mean, I didn't realize, not that my child had an eating disorder, but I didn't even appreciate that she was hating her body.
Yeah. I mean, and yes, so preoccupation with like weight loss, food, kind of calories, dieting. And the interesting thing about this is some of these behaviors are very normalized in the culture that we live in, this diet culture
100%.
mentality. And so all of a sudden your teenager might all of a sudden start like really wanting to focus in on counting calories or tracking, using these these apps and all these things that are available. So that can be really normalized, but
and that doesn't necessarily mean that they have an eating disorder. No. They may be taking more responsibility for their fitness, but you're saying oftentimes it's going to...
Yes, it starts with that. And then it can kind of get a little out of control. So that preoccupation, kind of So some of the emotional or kind of behavioral signs would be those types of preoccupations, kind of refusing to eat certain foods or kind of like eliminating all types of food groups. Like right now, I often see clients come in and they're so scared of carbs because that's been something that's been demonized in diet culture. And so I'm sitting there and they refuse to eat any carbs. Trying to get them to eat a piece of bread is so scary for them. So
I see it with kids like, I'm especially boys, like, I'm off sugar. I'm not eating any sugar.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
know, and
that way.
yeah,
it's
when I was in junior high, one of the really cool kids in school, and he happened to live in my neighborhood, but he was like the cool kid. He opened up about an eating disorder in junior high. I forgot totally all about this. And it was all around sports too. Like this thing that we just attribute to women and girls. I think that men have been hiding it and hiding it well.
Oh, absolutely.
For years and years. And I see the same thing in gay men. And it often comes along with like over exercising, over like body, focus on the body and muscles and thinness. And it's really, it's interesting to see it because it's very different than women, right?
Yeah.
It's different than we are. And we've kind of come out. I mean, I think a couple of maybe 10 years ago, it was really important for women to be really muscular. And I think just flat out skinny's now very in.
Yeah.
It
goes through trends. Yeah. There it is. It's when you look at diet culture, it's very trendy. Like back in the 90s, no fat was the trend.
Low fat,
and so
everything.
Everything had to be non-fat. I mean, that was the beginning of my eating disorder. I could not have anything that had fat in it. And it was anyway, so it's just.
And I remember like my healthy meal was pasta, which now it's like the death sentence.
Yes. Yeah.
And to the point of like things that are like things are so common, like with like why this is so common. Obviously, we know like social media and all the filters and all the things that aren't presenting reality are contributing to this. It was really funny though. I also see such a generational, in good ways, a generational move away from kind of diet culture, at least in my experience. Like my mom still like counts, like she's so careful about her calorie consumption. Yeah. She always has been. Someone got her like a light drink and she's like, no, it's got 70 calories in it. So she just really wouldn't drink it, which, okay, that's her prerogative, but she'll make body image comments a lot. And I didn't notice it until I had my kids around her more. And then I'm like, Mom, I just don't like to equate things with like, I don't want that to go right to my thighs. Cause I've been careful not to say those things. My kids see me work out. They see like I try to eat healthy and fuel them healthy, but I try to keep it on a healthy kick, not like cause I want to be skinny. But recently I had my teens watching The Devil Wears Prada. And of course, it's fashion industry, and it's joking, like you mentioned, Carey, like haha. But it's like I'm one flu away from my goal.
One stomach flu away,
right? And I kept saying to my kids, the Emily Blunt character, like, that's not how we think. And I kept feeling like I needed to like, that's actually not okay. That's not healthy. And they're like, we get it, Mom. It's just a movie. I'm like, but I don't want to normalize this. I was like so sensitive to it. In my mind, I'm like, what would Carey do?
I know.
She would probably. You were in my head, Carey. But I think that in some ways we are more aware of the dangers of this, but kids are still even probably more exposed to, beyond the after school special about anorexia. It's there. No one's telling them this isn't real when they're looking at social media.
There's no amount of family talk that can override what they're experiencing.
Yeah.
And everything on Instagram, those girls are all fabulous. They're all skinny. They're all up to the nines. For guys, they're seeing these weightlifting videos, these guys with 4% body fat. It's tough. And it feels like maybe it needs to just be an ongoing conversation.
Yeah,
at
absolutely.
Home.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a statistic, and I've got it right in front of me. Just COVID was a massive time for a lot of like just kind of being at home. And also the social media really ramped up. So there's a statistic that says the eating disorder related healthcare needs increased 65% between 2018 and 2022. I mean, it's crazy. And we're seeing that just in the clinic where I see people, is just the need is so high. However, there is so much shame around this. People feel so much guilt and shame. They don't want to admit some of the things that they're engaging in. And then when you put that in with an LGBTQ individual who's also feeling shame about their identity, not being accepted by family or being scared to come out, it gets really scary. And so this is where some of the
the shame is their baseline, right? Like that's not anything new.
We've got shame, we've got hidden things happening here. Anytime we've got everything in the dark corners. So these eating disorders are putting our kids at higher risk for harm, self-harm, right? And so then we've got LGBTQ people who are already at higher risk for self-harm. So what does that look like?
Yeah, so this is very important to talk about. And I think we were talking a little bit about some of the signs and symptoms, and I'm happy to kind of address that a little bit more so that people can know what to look for. But just for parents who are listening, it's important for you to be aware that when you have an LGBTQ individual and then they're also engaging in disordered eating or eating disorder behaviors, the combination of that, when you have a history of an eating disorder along with an LGBTQ youth, the statistics for attempted suicide are 4 to 6 times what someone who just has an eating disorder without being LGBTQ. Wow. So it's very, very common for suicidal ideation to accompany the eating disorder behaviors. And the reason for this, and this is also in individuals who are LGBTQ as well, and the suicidal ideation is high. And part of that reason is when you have an undernourished brain, when your brain is malnourished, you are in a lot of distress. Your body and your brain does not have the energy to be able to function properly. You can't think clearly. You have extreme amounts of anxiety and depression. You're constantly thinking about food. And it becomes overwhelming, and you just you want to isolate. You can feel extremely depressed. You have extreme mood swings. Nothing feels right. I mean, you guys, I'm sure you can understand moments where you've felt starved. We all know those experiences.
We've all fasted on a Sunday.
Right. So that feeling of starvation where you just don't really feel like you can think straight. You're so hungry. And someone who has, been restricting for long periods of time, more than just a fast Sunday, but we're talking like weeks or months.
Oh my gosh.
That their body is so stressed and so weak, and they end up just not losing that desire to keep going, and they don't know how to get out of it. Wow. So along with the suicidal ideation, something else that's very common that we see a lot, and the statistics around this can be upward of 65% of people who experience, they call it non-suicidal self-injury. This often is in the form of cutting. And many people who are engaged in eating disorder behaviors also have a desire. It doesn't, in our minds, it doesn't really make sense. Like, why would that be something that someone would want to do? But it's a very common thing, this idea of wanting to somehow cope by releasing pain in that way. Mm-hmm. And so that the overlap of the eating disorder and that self-harm, and often in the way of cutting, is very common. And it's not necessarily because they want to end their life. It's just a way of releasing pain. And the sad thing about that is that many of those individuals, people want to label those behaviors as attention seeking.
Right.
And that can be so shaming and so harmful. So, if if a parent's listening and they've noticed, scars on their kids' arms or in other places, or kind of like a wound that they weren't sure about, it would be very just pay attention to what's going on. It can be really easy as a teen who's, seeking independence, withdrawing from family, to engage in these behaviors without parents really even knowing they're happening,
Yeah, and hiding it under short sleeve shirts or pants.
Yeah.
I don't think we talk nearly enough about cutting in this particular community because
Yeah.
the numbers are big, and I think we really focus a lot on suicidality, which is super important.
Mm-hmm.
But also, our kids are hurting themselves, and we don't.
Absolutely.
We may or may not know it, and they're. I mean, I had something in under my skin, like a sliver or something. The idea of like cutting my skin open to get it out, like I think, oh, I'm tough enough to do that. Well, guess what?
Mhm.
I'm not. I say this in response to they're just seeking attention, because actually cutting into your skin, like everything about you and your body and your brain tells you not to do that. So when you get to that, we have to realize that is when someone's able to bypass that, there's something happening there that we need to
Yes.
pay attention to.
Absolutely.
So-
It's very serious. Yeah.
It's
that
very
leads
serious.
that leads me to wonder, like, what protective factors like that can help. Like, what can parents do? What can we in this community do? What can LGBTQ people do to kind of help themselves? And this probably sounds so obvious, but what does a parent do if they suspect self-harm or eating disorder? What do you do?
Yeah. Yeah. Those are great questions. Yeah. I mean, it's so interesting, right? Like, in this community, we know we hear the statistics about, just having one person in a LGBTQ person's life that is supportive, that decreases the rate of suicide by, 4 times or something like that. So it's the same thing for this. Like, having a supportive family that affirms the individual's identity is like one of the number one things that we can do. Helping your child feel connected at school, having a caring group of friends for these children, teaching and modeling self-compassion for your children, and the gender affirming care piece is huge. And when we talk about gender affirming care, I think a lot of people just automatically go to medications and, surgeries and things like that.
Surgeries,
And that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about having them see a therapist who affirms their identity, who talks to them and acknowledges having them see a dietitian who affirms their identity. As a parent, if you notice these behaviors, being willing to talk with them in a non-threatening way, a non-shaming way about, like, I notice that you haven't been eating much, or I've noticed that your lunch has been coming home, without you eating it, or I notice that you've had some cuts. Like, can you tell me more about that? Like, get curious without accusing, get curious, and then offer, if they seem super resistant or, don't want to talk about it. I mean, and this is where the mood swings can get really bad because, there's just a lot going on, and I'm sure.
Well, they're protecting themselves, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And so this is where it's like, okay, maybe I need to seek professional help. And if they don't want to go to a therapist, then as a parent, you find a therapist that is trained in this, that is trained in, and make sure, reaching out to therapists who have training in eating disorders is really important. There are some therapists that can, if they aren't trained, can cause a lot of harm. Because, and I've seen this happen. I'm nothing against therapists, but the training in the eating disorder side of things is really important. And then, on help with like nourishing your child, getting them back to, a healthier weight and things like that. Seeing a dietitian that is also trained in eating disorders is really important. Getting them to the doctor to have a checkup, and they don't need to get lab work done. Lab work is is a big indicator that someone might be experiencing an eating disorder, and getting their weights checked at the doctor. And so all of these things you can do without, if you feel nervous about addressing it with your child, or just be like, we're going to have a well child visit, or we're going to head to the doctor and just check in there. And then also like, hey, I thought we could go see a therapist. There's all sorts of ways you can do it. And I'm happy to, if anyone would like to reach out to me and have questions about that, I'm totally happy to share my thoughts on that. So, yeah.
Can we put your email address
Absolutely.
on the podcast?
Yeah.
So someone can email you directly with questions?
Yeah, absolutely.
And why don't you keep track of those questions, and then we can record again and talk about it. Like what things came up, especially in this community. Like, is it different than you're seeing? All of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing that stands out to me from what you shared just now, Carey, from like protective factors perspective, is that having an affirming adult lowers risk of self-harm so significantly.
Yeah.
And I think that probably less now, but it still exists. Like there's such a hesitancy to affirm a child at first, especially people who have been taught, and with coming from a religious space, feeling like, oh, this is what we've been warned against.
Yeah.
And that delay in affirming poses risks. It comes with risks. And that's not to say that there isn't a warming up process or a grieving process or a learning opportunity for all of us when we first step into this space. We're not automatically experts, but understanding the risks of delaying affirming your child is also really important. This comes at a cost if you are postponing affirming. Even while still learning, you can love and learn at the same time.
Yeah, absolutely.
And Carey, I loved what you said about a doctor that affirms the child. And I think that's important here, because there's a big difference between affirming and saying, I understand you're feeling this. And I'm there with you, that you're feeling this. And taking, like with the trans child, taking further measures. I mean, that doesn't have anything to do with hormone treatment and surgery or anything. Like, that stuff is so different. This is just saying to the child, I see that you see this in yourself, and I want to know more about it.
And advocating, like I have gone to the doctor and said, I have a trans child. Who would be best in your practice to see my child? I don't want someone who's going to be like, oh, that's a phase. Or I want someone who knows, not only affirms them, but actually like understands about trans care. So I've done the work, and I didn't wait till I was sitting in the waiting room with my kid. Yeah. I was proactive about it. And it's not even just trans. If you have an LGBTQ child, just like you would if you had a kid that had a special health condition that you wanted to be sure someone had an awareness of and a familiarity and an expertise in even.
Yeah.
It's not a bad idea to make sure that the pediatrician your child is seeing, that the providers, mental health, all of them, that they're on the same page as you.
Yeah.
Or that they have an understanding, a training, that they won't be actually contributing to the messaging of shame or even misunderstanding that might be faced in other situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one example I thought that was just amazing is I was treating a trans male youth, and their parents helped them with the start of puberty. This is oftentimes when these individuals experience extreme stress. I mean, and this is where they want to start restricting, because they learn that if they restrict, their periods can stop, their breast development can stop, all these things that are causing so much stress, they're trying to control that, right? And so one of the youth that I was working with, their mom went and advocated for them to just get on birth control so that certain birth controls can stop. You can stop having a period by being on that. It wasn't because they were going to be, but it was just to let's just stop the period right now so we can help you get regulated and help you not feel that stress that's coming every month, because that was a huge time of like severe distress for them. And so, and I just thought that's a beautiful way. And that is a medical intervention, but so many parents let their kids get on birth control.
I mean,
in
my
high
daughter was
school
on it for her skin, right?
Yes,
Like, 'cause
exactly. So I'm like, that's a great thing for you to do to help take that one piece of distress that's causing you so much anxiety and take that away so that you can work on eating enough for your body so that your brain can think, so that you can do well in school, so that you can be happy. Everyone knows how miserable it is to be starving all the time, and nourishment is a huge part of finding joy in your life. So, yeah.
It's a perfect example of a parent taking in those protective steps, to say, what can we do? What can we do to help you?
And I might just add, I have a dear friend who found out their child had a serious eating disorder. And it took them totally by surprise. Totally. And there's a lot of shame that comes on us moms. Like, how did I not know?
Mm-hmm.
Because eating disorders don't always make skinny children.
No.
I mean, it does not always equal B. And moms that find out their child is cutting, like, or suicidal, like, you have to just understand that these things are done in secret for a reason.
Yeah.
And that we aren't always, a lot of times our kids don't want us to know or to be distressed about it.
Right.
So we have to give ourselves a little grace and just realize, like, there will be moments where you're sad or angry or whatever, and you can process that, but that just be grateful that you know now, and that you can move forward and help the child in whatever space they are.
Yeah.
So, I haven't experienced it, but I feel for parents just having watched that happen. And I didn't see it either in the same child, not at all.
Yeah.
So, not that I'm a mom, but I'm close to this child. So, this is so important. I never hear it talked about. It's really common.
Yeah. And just one note about that. Really, most people, when they think about eating disorders, that they visualize like a very emaciated looking,
Yeah, right. Exactly.
girl, white girl, is what they think. But it goes across all genders, all races, and only 6% of people diagnosed with eating disorders are medically underweight. So there are many people out there. In fact, with me, when I had my eating disorder, no one would have looked at me and thought I had an eating disorder. I was restricting so severely, but my body is this miraculous thing. There's so many protective measures that it does, it engages in to keep you alive and safe. And one of those things is it just slows down. As soon as you restrict, it just starts slowing down your metabolism so that it will protect you. And so there's those types of things sometimes often occur in individuals. So they might not look emaciated, but they might be severely restricting and having all the mental, all the physical and psychological symptoms that they're experiencing, but they're just not going to look like it.
Right.
So,
and I think this is why having this conversation is so important, is just pegging it as having an awareness. I remember, so Carey and I live near each other. We're always walking. We're always walking and talking, solving the world's problems. And I remember when my child was like newer into this space of being trans or coming out as trans. And I remember, Carey, you were saying something about like, there are a lot of trans people with eating disorders because their whole stance has been hating their body. And I just was like, I hadn't even thought about that. And I felt like I was, I'm super affirming and I'm here to show up and do all the things. I didn't even know that was a factor that I should be aware of. And we haven't gone down that road and needed any sort of eating disorder intervention, but I didn't even know that I needed to know about it. And that was a wake up call for me. And so ever since been more aware of that it can be an issue. And I think for a lot of these parents, it's overwhelming just to step into the space of having an LGBTQ kid. You're like, wow, I haven't gotten the handbook yet on what I'm supposed to be doing here.
Right.
But add that one more chapter to the handbook that we don't have is the risk of eating disorders and self-harm and all that.
So important.
Absolutely.
I'm so grateful that you have studied for this. I mean, you're put in the right place at the right time. I'm just so impressed. This is important, and I think we should talk about it more. And we are grateful to you, Carey, for all of your
Yeah.
wisdom and
Oh,
for being
thank you.
vulnerable and willing to share this. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, you guys.
Find all episodes of the Lift and Love podcast and so much more on our YouTube channel at liftandlove.org, and of course, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for everything you do to lift and love.